It's Monday, April 15th, 2024. It's tax day, so you've got till midnight to postmark those. This is Ashton Ellett here with another installment of the Documenting Congress Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies at the University of Georgia. I'm here today in Burlington, Vermont, on the campus of the University of Vermont, UVM, with Mr. Connell Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher is Library Professor Emeritus at the University of University of Vermont, where he worked in various capacities from 1970 until his retirement in 2006. He earned a bachelor's degree in English literature from Pace University and a master's degree in English from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, before subsequently taking a master's of library science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. An early member of the Society of American Archivists Congressional Papers Roundtable, as well as the Association of Centers for the Study of Congress, political papers and congressional collections have figured prominently in his career. In the late 1980s, he served as a staff archivist for both Vermont U.S. Senators Robert T. Stafford and Patrick Leahy. He has been honored with a number of prestigious commendations, including the New England Archivist Distinguished Service Award and Center for Research on Vermont's Lifetime Achievement Award. He's also been named a Fellow of the Vermont Academy of Arts and Sciences, as well as a Fellow of the Society of American Archivists. Thank you very much, Mr. Gallagher, Connie, for having me here in a cold, drizzly Vermont. It was 87 degrees when I left Atlanta yesterday, so it's only about a 30 or 40 degree drop. But it's great to be back in Vermont, and it's great to be sitting here talking to you about your life and career working in and around archives and Congress. So tell me about your childhood and upbringing. You grew up in Brooklyn?
Brooklyn, right, yeah, Brooklyn, New York, yeah.
Whereabouts?
And Flatbush.
Flatbush, okay.
My parents were from Ireland. They came out here in the late 20s. They met in New York City and got married around 1935 or so. And then they moved to Brooklyn. And we moved around a number of times. We were in apartments.
Sure.
There were three. I was the youngest. Oldest sister Mary, middle sister Patricia, and then me, Connell. People call me Connie.
All solid Irish names.
And we lived in an Irish neighborhood, a very Irish neighborhood. My father was from County Donegal, and there were probably half of the people in that area were from Donegal. And so most of the kids who were in grammar school with me had Irish parents.
What was your parish church?
It was called St. Teresa of Avila.
Okay.
And it had a boys' school and a girls' school, and they had a fence between them. And you daren't go over and even try to talk through the fence at the girls.
Yes, the Mother Superior wouldn't like that.
That's right.
So I assume you attended the boys' school, or did you attend public schools?
I attended the boys' school, yeah.
So tell me about what did your parents do for a living, or did your mom stay at home as was the custom?
My mom stayed at home for the beginnings, but we were relatively poor, so
Sure.
my dad did maintenance kinds of jobs, and he was in the Navy Yard during World War II as a welder, and then after the war he got a job with Borden's Ice Cream.
Sure.
And he worked nights, and he was the guy who picked up an order on the loading dock, went back into the freezer and kind of loaded it up on a high-low and drove it out to the dock. So he loved to work nights. So we never saw a lot of him because
Sure.
when he would come home at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, he'd go to sleep.
Yeah.
And then he would get up and do some work around the house in the afternoon, kinds of stuff, and then he'd go back to bed again before dinner, and we'd have dinner with him, and then he'd be off on the subway off to Borden's.
So would he have been a dock worker or a teamster?
He was a teamster. Yeah. He was definitely a teamster. He was a strong union guy.
Oh, I can imagine in New York City in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah. My mom, I guess when I was maybe maybe 7 years old or so, she took a job working in high school cafeterias. She did that for quite a long time. So I was one of those a house key
Oh yeah.
child. So I would come home and I would have to start the potatoes, you know, for dinner. We always had potatoes being Irish.
Sure. It's a stereotype for a reason sometimes.
Yeah.
So, tell me, you actually spent quite a bit of time back in Ireland.
Yeah.
As a kid, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Tell me about that
Yeah.
experience.
Okay. Well, my father always wanted to go back to Ireland, live in Ireland. He looked at being in the U.S. as temporary.
Okay.
And he convinced my mother to move back in 1946, the whole family. I was 2. And we lived on a farm in Donegal. And we had no transportation. She was stuck pretty much with these 3 kids miles away from any town. And my dad was off on his horse or bicycle, whatever, into town doing business and making arrangements to sell sheep and all that kind of thing. So my mom lasted at that for 2 years, and then she convinced him that she wanted to go back.
I bet she did.
She had become a New Yorker. Yeah, she loved New York. So we were back in '48, and then he convinced her again in '52 or so to go back and live in Dublin. You know, being in the city.
Sure.
She had a sister living there, and so we headed off to Dublin. Just my mother and the 3 kids. And we went for about 6 months or so, and it was in 1952, 53, and everybody that she talked to told her, don't do it. Ireland was in a depression, pretty much. Still after World War II,
Right.
there were no jobs available, no money. The Irish were flowing to America, so don't come back. So she decided to come back. My father was angry as heck, threw the chairs and stuff like that, and then he just went off to Ireland for about a month, and he was an alcoholic, so he did a lot of drinking, and he crashed with his bicycle and got injured, and then decided that he had better come back. So he came back, and that was the end of the trips to Ireland for the family, anyway.
Well, you know, several people who get involved in congressional papers and archives are sort of history buffs from an early age, but it seems like your interests lay primarily with literature and especially English literature in your early days.
Yeah. Well, it started out in science. My parents wanted me to become a pharmacist or a dentist. They figured that there were good hours in those jobs. So I kind of wanted to be a forensic chemist.
Okay.
And when I was in high school, I went to Power Memorial Academy, which was a Irish Christian Brothers school in Midtown Manhattan. It's a school that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar attended.
Okay.
It was a big basketball.
Lou
Al Cindar, that's right. It was a big basketball school. Well, I started out as a math science. I took 4 years of math and 4 years of science, but I had physics in junior year, and I got a D, so they wouldn't give me chemistry. So I never had chemistry. I decided to go to St. John's University because all Catholic schools, I only applied to Catholic schools, and I applied as a chemistry major, and they agreed to do that for some crazy reason. I had never had chemistry, and naturally I was in a class with people, everybody else had chemistry, so I didn't do well, so I flunked out of St. John's after a year. So I worked in this insurance brokerage in New York City for about six or 8 months, and during that time I decided to go back to school and major in something in the humanities.
Okay.
So Pace College was Pace College then, it's Pace University now. Pace College was near this powder maker and company that I worked in. I walked over there one day, talked to the admissions people. They were quite interested. They said I could come right away. And we decided I had a nice mix of humanities and such, and I went to Pace, and after a year I had such a good English teacher, I decided to go English. It was English or history, so I decided to go in English, but I had kind of a history minor because I loved history as well, and did that for 4 years.
I was sort of the opposite. I was a history English toss-up, and then I decided going with history. I was an English double major until I got to British colonial, post-colonial literature, and it was so depressing.
Oh man.
I decided I couldn't possibly go on with this, so I switched that to a minor, and then added political science to my major. But this would have been the early 1960s.
That's right. Yeah.
62 to 66.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So, were you mostly working full time, or were you able to sort of get into the college spirit, college activities, the things that were possessing college kids in those days?
Well, the year in St. John's, I did, because I was failing courses, so I joined a fraternity, and then there was a bar nearby called Jim and Jean's, and we used to hang out there. And the fraternity was called Sigma Rho, and my mother referred to it as Skid Row.
Yeah.
And she was right. So when I went to Pace, I had totally reformed. I worked 10 hours a week at this powder maker insurance company while I was in school, and the only activities I got involved with was the literary club. I became the president of that, and we had poets come in, and we had programs and that kind of thing. But pretty much I was a student. I did quite well. So when I graduated from Pace, I got a fellowship at the University of Wisconsin for PhD, and took off for Wisconsin in September of, I guess it was 1966. Yeah.
Now, this was obviously the Vietnam War era. Was that something that you were obviously interested in and familiar with? But were you involved in the protest movements or anything, or the student protest movements of that era?
Not a lot. I certainly was watching out for the draft. I made sure I registered every semester.
Sure.
And one semester, for some reason, I got a letter telling me to report for a physical, and I found out that the registrar had forgotten to send in my papers. So I almost got caught about halfway through. But when I arrived first, I went to Milwaukee, and I got my master's in English at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and then I went off to Madison, and I met a friend from Brooklyn who was starting out as a graduate student. So we couldn't find a place to live, so we moved into this university club, which was mostly old professors.
Right.
So we had a room there, and it was right across from the library and a green and a historical society. And one night I heard this a lot of noise and kids out there and stuff, and they were chanting, woo, 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 woo. I couldn't make it out. Finally, when they passed the historical society, I could make it out. It was "We want silk, we want silk." It was a panty raid. I had never seen it. Heard about those, never seen it. Well, maybe a week later or so, again I hear some noise. A lot of noise going on, and I look out the window, and there's this mob of students on the green in front of the library, and they're saying, "We won't go, we won't go." It was the first Dow demonstration protest in Madison, which continued on the whole time I was there.
Right.
3 more years I was there. Every spring it just blew up.
Sure.
And I would go to the demonstrations and such, and often I would be running because the police would be crowding in, and the National Guard and so on. And once, I think when I was in my last year there, I was working at the Historical Society, and there was a big demonstration on the green, so I went out on the front porch to watch it. The National Guard were all on one side. They were getting dressed and putting on their stuff and everything else, and all of a sudden they started firing tear gas. I turned around to go back into the museum. They had locked the doors. So I had to run for it there.
So you mentioned the Historical Society. That was sort of was your first introduction to archives.
That's correct. Yeah.
How did this English major, this English doctoral candidate, wind up as a manuscripts processor or what have you at the Historical Society?
Well, I was running out of funds. My fellowship had come to an end, and I was still working on my minor field was European history. I was working on European history, so I needed some living money. A friend of mine was working at the historical societies. He said they need people there, so I went over, and they hired me as a processor, and taught me how to process collections, and. See, we started out with the Clark Mollenhoff papers. He was a reporter during the 1950s and 60s, and really interesting stuff. A lot of stuff about Eisenhower and about the McCarthy period, and so it was great history. So I was stung right away by the content of manuscripts, and they moved me to there was a fabric company that whose papers I processed. They were 19th century. I think it was Ashton Woolen Mills, something like that. And so I learned to handle 19th century records, all handwritten, piles of account books and stuff. But it was like a puzzle putting that together, and did a nice job on that. And I did a few other collections there, but I made some contacts too. Patrick Michael Quinn was my advisor, and he was a pretty important character in the Society of American Archivists.
Yeah, tell me about him.
Well, Pat, he was my boss, and I had a lot of time on my hands, so he was moving Wisconsin Historical Society had collections in all parts of the state. The various counties, they would have their county records in that county and so on. So one of them, one of the college campuses was moving the library. So we had to go up there to move all of the Wisconsin Historical Society records out of the old library into the new library. So every day Pat would pick me up in the morning. This was for about a week or two. Pick me up about 6 o'clock in the morning. We'd drive up there to move those records, and on that drive we talked archives, and I learned a lot about archives, and I learned a lot about Pat, and so we became really good friends. And towards the end of the semester, I was engaged to be married in June. I needed a job, so I was starting to apply for jobs, and one day Pat drops this letter on my desk. And it's an ad for a manuscript librarian at the University of Vermont. So I was applying in advertising, publishing, teaching, and archives. And I got some nibbles from J. Walter Thompson. I had sent them samples of my writing and stuff, and we were going back and forth, so it was likely I might get something there. I interviewed at Collier's Encyclopedia in New York City and was offered a job as a copy editor there for $90 a week. And that would have worked out because we could have lived in my parents' basement in Brooklyn, which I'm sure my wife would have loved to do. But while all that was going on, I got a call from University of Vermont inviting me to come for an interview. So I did. Nancy was excited because she's a skier. And I was interviewed by a man named John Beekler, who was head of special collections. And John was from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He had his library degree from Madison. So we had a lot to talk about. We had a great dinner, and his wife was from Baraboo. So we talked Wisconsin all night. When I flew back to Wisconsin, I was sure I was going to get the job. The interview the next day, I met the director, who kept asking me, "Where did you get your library degree? Where did you get?" I didn't have a library degree. It wasn't needed for that job. It wasn't in the job description.
Sure.
But I interviewed with John in the morning and with staff in special collections. And I met library staff at the coffee break and such. And then John turned me over to the university archivist in the afternoon. And Tom Bassett, his name was. And Tom was kind of an absent-minded professor type. And he walked me around campus, and then he brought me out to the University Green, which was gorgeous. It was a beautiful day. and he had me sit out there. He said he had some errands to do and he'd pick me up later. So he left the candidate out there.
No,
But-
not usually what we do, but all right.
But it was nice because I really got the feeling for the place.
Yeah.
I fell in love with UVM. Then he came back. We went over to his house. He lived nearby, had a drink, and then he drove me to the airport to fly back. So it was a really positive experience. And then in about a week or so, maybe a little bit longer than that, I got a phone call offering me the job. So that was settled to start August 1st.
And that would have been, what sort of time was there between the interview and call and the start date?
It was probably close to 2 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pretty standard. You know, my wife's college roommate was from Baraboo, Wisconsin.
Oh,
It's a small world.
yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah.
So tell me, had you had much experience with political papers or congressional records at Wisconsin?
No, none at all. None at all. Never even thought about it.
Okay.
Never even thought about what archives were until I went to the Historical Society.
Right.
Yeah.
So what were your, when you get here to UVM, what were your original tasks and responsibilities in that job?
Okay. I was the first manuscripts librarian hired. The university archivist was a great field man. He brought in all kinds of collections. He was a Vermonter. He had a PhD in history. His father had taught at UVM, and he was very much interested in acquiring collections. He was ahead of his time in that he was acquiring a lot of personal papers and such. Historians weren't using those much at that time. That was something to come later. So he filled the library up with all these collections. So they needed to hire somebody to process them because Tom was.
It's a good thing he did.
Yeah, Tom wasn't going to do it, and he didn't know how to do it. So on the interview, one of the questions the boss kept asking me was, Bickler kept asking me, he goes, "Do you know how to do inventories?" And that's what I was doing in Madison. So I went right at the collections. I started out with a local judge's papers, and I learned in the process that he was a founder of the Green Mountain Club, very much involved in hiking and stuff in the mountains. So it was a good collection to start with. And I did a few of these kind of personal papers, small collections. And then John was taking the inventories that I was doing, and he was copying them and sending them out to faculty. Because he was really excited to get faculty coming over to use the manuscript collections. So
Also ahead of his time.
Yeah, also ahead of his time, exactly. Because special collections was very quiet. We didn't get a lot of use there. Well, a couple of the faculty members started to come over, and there was this one guy, I can't remember his name now, but this one historian who was a 19th century historian, and he wanted to have his students look at small towns in Vermont and try to figure out what kind of outside influences they had. Did they have relatives who lived outside? Was their whole world entirely circumscribed?
Sure.
So he had students reading diaries and letters and stuff, and keeping track of the names mentioned in the diaries and figuring out where those people were from. And the kids loved it. They loved handling an original diary, looking at that. So that really caught on. This professor, Marshall True was his name, he kind of set up shop in special collections. He would come over himself and sit there. And if they had questions, they could kind of deal with him, or they could deal with me,
Sure.
back and forth. So that was the real start of it, and that kind of blossomed. Colleagues of his started coming over, checking this out. And it was at a time when historians were really starting to look at primary sources. Mm-hmm. And I had one student who was fluent in German, and her parents were from Austria. And she had a relative who fled the Holocaust from Austria. And they had all of this family correspondence from him in German. She was taking a senior seminar in German history, and the history professor would not let her use these papers. He said, "Those are beyond you. I want you to work strictly on books." She was really, really annoyed by that. but
one imagines.
that's the way it was at that time.
Yeah.
So the archives really started catching on. So the place got very busy, and at some point people were interested in learning about what I was doing, and they thought it was kind of a fun job. So I started something called the Archives Practicum, and it was aimed really at graduate students in history who didn't want to teach. They just loved history, but they wanted to do something else. So I got quite a few students doing that, and they were helping me out because they were processing for me. I would teach them the process. I had them read some archival literature, and then I'd work with them on these big collections.
Was this in conjunction with the history department or sort of parallel?
It was in conjunction with them
Okay,
because
okay.
these were credit courses. They were giving them credit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Also ahead
Yeah.
of its time.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, some history departments were and are resistant to
Yeah,
sort
yeah,
of
yeah,
alternative academic
exactly.
career paths.
Yeah, but since these historians were using special collections so much, I got to know them really well.
Okay.
You know? So and then I got involved with them. The thing that happened later, we can just talk about it later, is there was this professor named Sam Hand who was into politics, and he brought his classes over all the time to use congressional papers, gubernatorial papers, as well as all of the books and references we had, and he and I became very good friends. And after I went off to work for Stafford and Leahy, Sam proposed that we teach a course on Robert Stafford, a seminar, graduate seminar on Stafford, and have Stafford come a couple of times and have some of Stafford's staff come. And so we did that, and it worked out well. We had about 20 students, and we had a lot of good papers, and I think we had one master's thesis.
Fantastic.
And we followed that up with a seminar on George Aiken.
Right.
We had more in that. I think we had 25 students in that one. And we didn't have Aiken was dead by then,
Sure.
so we didn't have any visitors. But we had the Aiken papers. You know,
Well, there's an interesting story attached to the Aiken papers. Tell me about how those came to be here at UVM.
Okay, we back in the 70s, early 70s. Aiken retired in '74. We had a number of political collections. We had the Warren Austin papers. Austin was a U.S. Senator from 1931 to 1946. And my boss, John Beekler, wanted me to process that collection. He kept after me about it. But I was getting my feet wet still. I was doing small collections.
Yeah.
But I would look at the Austin every now and then. It looked sort of interesting. So I just named a date and I just started working on it. I spent probably about a year on it. And it was fantastic because he was on the Foreign Relations Committee, and for most of those years, during World War II.
Right.
And he was involved with all those conferences that they were having, you know, in Casablanca and a lot of those conferences. He was a ranking member on that committee.
Oh, wow.
So it was exciting. And he was in the Senate during the Depression. He was a conservative for domestic affairs, but he was a liberal in foreign policy, unlike most of the Republicans. Republicans were isolationists.
Sort of a Wendell Willkie.
Exactly, yeah,
Republican.
yeah. And he was a world man. So that got me interested in congressional papers, and at just about that time we got Senator Winston Prouty's papers delivered. He had no place to put them, so he put them in the Xerox room. But then when Aiken came, we're talking trailer trucks. So the university had to buy a building downtown, and we refashioned it, put shelving in it, 3 stories, and we got the best. We got the top story, which meant lugging papers up and down the stairs. There was no elevator in the building.
No, get your steps in.
But we had no idea how much stuff was coming when we got the word when it was coming, and I and Sam Hand and another historian named Nick Muller were down there, and this trailer truck pulls up, and the boxes they were in wooden crates.
Yep.
There were 4 file drawer size boxes in each crate, and they unloaded these with equipment, got them into the building, and just left them on the floor in there.
Yeah, they did their job.
Yeah, right. So we started right away. We got a crowbar, and we were breaking off the wooden crates and stuff just to get a look at what the papers
This
were
is
like.
the glamorous stuff that archivists never tell anybody. This is the real primo part of the job.
Yeah, it was fun. There was just so much stuff there, and so that really put us on the map in terms of congressional papers.
In terms of linear feet, what were you talking about with the Aiken papers?
Probably 700.
Okay.
Yeah, decent size.
Yeah.
But they hadn't kept everything. I was talking to Aiken's widow. She said they had so many papers. They threw out a lot of stuff from the 50s, which was, that would have been the McCarthy period, and there would have been a lot of interesting stuff there in the Eisenhower administration. So we're lacking that in the Aiken papers. But his big thing was the St. Lawrence Seaway, the creation of that, and he was on the subcommittee on Canada. He was on foreign relations too, subcommittee on Canada. So that's how he got that one through. PL 480, that's food for peace to Europe.
Yes.
After the war, that was another one of his programs. Those were the main ones that he was interested in, I think.
So it's around this time. I mean, I guess it'd probably be a little later in the 1970s. You decided to go back to school and get that library degree that everybody kept asking about. What was the impetus for that, and what do you think you got out of the MLS or MLIS, whatever they called it at the time?
Yeah, well, one of the things I started doing right away is I started taking some courses in American history, because I had a little background there, but I was more interested in European history and literature and stuff. So I was taking history classes, and I was thinking maybe I should get a master's in history. And I realized that a second master's probably wouldn't help me, but the thing that I would need would be the library degree. One of the assistant directors one time was talking to me, and she was charge of cataloging and acquisitions, and she said, "With your credentials, I never would have hired you." And she was a strict librarian, So I filed that one away, and I could see the writing on the wall that I was not going to get any place. That John Beekler had a master's in English and a master's of library science.
Sure.
And he was head of the department. I figured if I want to follow in his footsteps, I better get that MLS. And so I chose Illinois because Illinois was considered the #1 library school in the country.
Still is.
Yeah,
Still is.
It was a great place. And I specialized in bibliography and rare books, pretty much, because I was starting to get an interest in those kinds of things. But I got a fellowship there as well. It was American Library Association fellowship. So it paid my tuition and gave me a stipend for the year. But I had to spend 10 hours a week working on the ALA archives, which were at Illinois.
Right.
So that was fine. That was something I was used to doing. I got a couple of things out of Illinois. One, they hammered into you public service. Yep. I had some interest in public service because I had done those things in classes and stuff. But I really that they really cemented that in, so that my view from then on was, with every collection I acquired, whether in rare books, manuscripts, or whatever, I was going to think of how I can get that collection used, and to get it used. It didn't help anybody while it's sitting on the shelf. So I picked up that knowledge there. I also took a class on the typographic disciplines of the book, where I hand printed a book on handmade paper and then bound it. So I learned that whole thing about how books were made before the 20th century. Really.
Sure.
So that I filed that away for when I eventually became a rare book librarian. But the public services piece is what is the main thing I got out of Illinois.
Well, you're clearly in this position, this path of professionalization. At what point do you become active in the Society of American Archivists, the SAA?
Okay, the first time I noticed them is when I was at the Wisconsin Historical Society. They had a meeting in Madison. So everybody was talking about the SAA. The SAA is here. And a number of of archivists came and visited the society, so I got to meet a few of them there. So that was my first touch with them. But a year after I was hired by UVM, I realized I didn't know anything about archives. I knew how to process some papers, but it's a big field. There's a lot of things I didn't know about. And there was a workshop being offered at the Ohio Historical Society. It was 2 weeks. It was like those institutes that they did at the National Archives,
Yep.
2 weeks. So I asked to go to that, and they were happy to send me. And my in-laws lived in Columbus, Ohio, so we stayed with them. And they drove me over to the Ohio Historical Society every day. And there I met who's who in SAA. Everything from the president of SAA, heads of the Michigan Historical Collections, University of Texas, Georgia, Florida. I mean, I met who's who in archives. It was just extraordinary to rub shoulders with these people. And then I learned a lot about photographs, and I learned a lot about accepting gifts, field work, all kind of appraisal of manuscripts, all kinds of things I came out of. And I also discovered that the next thing I had to do was to join the Society of American Archivists. So that's what I did the next year, and then I started attending those.
Now, it would have been, I guess, probably the early 80s where Congressional Papers Roundtable.
Yeah. Right.
Were you among that
Yeah.
first sort of cohort?
Yeah.
Tell me about that process and some of the folks who were involved in that early sort of coalescing of congressional archivists.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I had been in SAA for probably 10 years or so, and you know, we would all trade stories about collections that we had, and UVM had all of these congressional papers.
Right.
So I got to know other people who had congressional papers too. So we would talk. We got to know each other, and Karen Paul was one of the people
Sure.
that we got to know, and she invited us all to come to West Virginia to have a meeting about congressional papers.
The Harper's Ferry
The
Conference.
Harper's Ferry Conference, exactly. And that's where I met even more congressional archivists, one of the people I didn't know. And we had a nice conference there, and we started talking about how can we raise our profile in SAA. And somebody, I think maybe it was Carol Wynn from Washington, University of Washington, who came up with the idea that maybe we should form a roundtable.
Okay.
So everybody bid into that idea, and I remember Carol called me on the side on the subway station going back to Washington, and said, I will help found it, but I want you to be the first chair. So I agreed to that, and the roundtable was founded, and I was the first chair, and then they asked me to stay on for a second year, which was happy to do, and it was a great experience, and it was the beginning of a great history of congressional papers in the Society of American Archivists.
Well, what were your goals as a chair, but also as a roundtable in those early days?
I think we were just trying to get each other familiar with congressional papers and what was going on in congressional papers. We knew every institution had them, or most of them had them, and that they probably were having difficulty dealing with the volume.
As you knew firsthand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was the big question of do you save everything? How do you process 100 cartons of material? And those ideas were just being kicked around, and then we discovered. I think Nancy Peace wrote a book on congressional collections, where she talked about having archivists on senatorial and congressional staff to be on the inside to help trim these papers down somewhat, maybe pre-process them, work with the staff to tell them what's most important historically, but to kind of get an inside track on the collections, so that when they came to the institution, that there was a lot of work done on them already.
Right.
So that was it. But we had papers on people's experiences. Rebecca Johnson on Senator Williams from Delaware. I'm sure I gave more than one paper on Warren Austin and on Aiken and on a number of other things. And other archivists would talk about collections that they had, and we were trying to figure out ways to use them, how to get them into use, that kind of thing. They were taking up so much space.
Right.
They better be used.
Better be some utility in this.
Yeah, right. And all the legal issues relating to them too, discovering confidential materials and that kind of thing, which everybody knows about now.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Happens all the time in archives. We just send them back.
That's right, exactly, yeah. And committee papers are supposed to go to the National Archives.
Yep.
And senators often feel that all those papers belong to them. So it's kind of hard to convince them that they have to go back. I was reading some things just recently on Senator Leahy, and when I was working at the Judiciary Committee, and there they had it all set up that they dealt with Leahy's archivist. She would review papers that they were going to send to the National Archives, and she would point out things that needed to be copied for the senator's papers, and that system was kind of set up where the important things that Leahy wanted stayed with Leahy, but the heart of the collection went to the National Archives.
Which we'll point out is the value of having a staff archivist as a sitting member.
Yeah.
Which is my way of segueing to 1988, 1989. So this would have been, I guess, on your sabbatical or work release. That makes you sound like a prisoner.
Yeah.
But tell me about going to Washington.
Okay, I had a sabbatical coming up. We were allowed to take sabbaticals every 7 years or so. I think mine were about every 10 years. When I got around, I was so busy.
Yeah.
It was hard to get around to planning a sabbatical. But from the round table, from discussions we had at the round table and such, that idea about putting archivists in senatorial offices, that rang a bell with me, and I knew that there were a few in Washington at the time. This was the late 1980s, and so I figured let me take a shot at this. That sabbatical was coming up. SAA was meeting in Washington, I think maybe '86 or so. So at that meeting, I had made appointments to visit Congressman Jeffords' office, Senator Leahy's office, and Senator Stafford's office, to lay out my plan to see if any one of them or all of them would like to have me come and work with the archives. So Jeffords' office, they loved the idea, his administrative assistant, but she said, we don't have any money to hire you. And I need to have some money, because I get 3/4 salary being on sabbatical, but I'd have to stay in Washington and pay rent there, and then fly back and forth, and so I needed some money. So they couldn't do anything there. Then I went to Leahy's office, and they were very interested too, but they said, well, let us think about this. They didn't jump on it right away. But when I went to Stafford's office, I talked to the AA, and he almost didn't let me out.
Yeah.
Because they had an attic full of papers, 600 or 700 cartons, all dusty, and none of the staff wanted to get their hands dirty up there.
Are these in the Russell?
The Russell,
old Senate office building cages.
The cages, the Russell cages. So he gave me a nice salary to come down and do that. He was hoping that I could come right away, but he had to wait a year. I didn't go down till 1988, and so they hired me, and sabbatical came along, and my boss, John Beekler, was worried about me going on sabbatical. Who's going to do the archives, manuscripts? So the NHPRC had this program where you could, if you got a grant for somebody who wanted to move up in the field, to give them some administrative responsibility. So I got that grant, and I hired this young fellow named Jeff Marshall, who was, I think he had, let's see, I think he had finished library school. Yeah, he went to Simmons, and he was just looking to get into the archives field. So I hired him on that grant. So that took care of that problem for John Beekler, and went off to Washington, and it was kind of a scary thing. Washington was a big place.
Well, you're a Brooklyn kid.
I know. Yeah, I'm used to big cities.
Right.
But I mean, these were important. These were people with collars and ties, you know.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of scary. And then I arrived on the subway, and I walked through this park, and I could see the Capitol building and the Senate office buildings, and I made my way over to Hart. That's where Stafford had his office, on the first floor of Hart. Beautiful building, beautiful office. And the staff were excited to see me, and seemed very friendly and stuff. And I sat down with Neil Houston, the administrative assistant, and he went over a few things to me. And then he opened his desk drawer, and he reached in and he brought out a paper, and he put it out in front of me there, and it said on it, loyalty and integrity. He said, those are the two things that you have to understand. You're working for Stafford. You have to be loyal to Stafford and the Stafford staff, and you have to be honest. You don't want anything that you do to reflect poorly on the senator.
Sure.
So I got you on that one. Yeah, it's the Senate staffs. They're kind of like secret in a way, you know, because it's political.
At Russell Library, we do a Senate staff oral history project with going back to Senator Richard Russell and Herman Talmadge and Sam Nunn, and it's very much clubby is not the right.
Yeah.
That's sort of a different connotation, but it is a very tight knit group, and they still are highly protective of their members, even the members who have been deceased since 1971 or the turn of the century. But I understand exactly.
Yeah.
Now, who did you report to the AA?
Yeah, he did.
Okay.
Yeah, reported to the AA, and I discovered fairly quickly that there were two kinds of staff in the office. There was the administrative staff, clerical staff, and the professional staff.
Right.
And I discovered it was very judicious to not to get too involved on either side, because there was some conflict there between the two sides. So I think I sided more with the professional staff.
Sure.
As it went along the way, but I kept my finger in the pie for the clerical staff, because in Stafford's office I found out they had a central file which was like the major file for the whole office situation. Right. And that was kept by the clerical staff there. So that was the file that was the most important. When I went up to interview Vic Murky and then the other fellow, Bob White, who were his two legislative assistants. Vic was for Environment and Public Works Committee, and Bob was for the Education Committee. They were somewhat standoffish to me. They didn't want me looking in their files and stuff, and I mentioned that those files will go to Vermont with the paper. Vic said, "No way, those are my files. I'm taking those home with me." Didn't want to get into any arguments. So
better check with the senator on that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I checked with the AA on that, and the AA.
Next best thing.
Exactly. And then I was informed by the AA a few days later, that's all straightened out now. And but then I had to make my bridge with Vic Murky then. So he was keeping me pretty much at arm's distance until he was telling me about some hearing that the senator was chairing, and that he was going to that hearing with him, and I asked if I could tag along. So I did. He said, "Yeah, sure, okay," and Vic gave me a place there, and I sat behind the senator, and I watched what was going on. Vic laid a big binder in front of Senator Stafford, and then he stood at his shoulder, kind of, and then Stafford was running the meeting. Vic would point out some things. He'd turn a page, so he was right there supporting the senator. And then he talked to me. Vic talked to me later about that meeting later, and we got to know each other. We got to like each other, and he was very supportive of the fact that I was interested in what they were doing.
Right.
And that changed everything. And no problem there.
That's a bit of an aside, but that's really how we often pitch to members of the Georgia delegation, because your first contact is almost always with staff. It's very rarely with the member, and if it is the member, you're referred to the AA or the deputy chief of staff.
Yeah.
And it's not just documenting the work of the member; it's documenting the work of the office and the entire operation, from, as you say, administrative support side, the schedulers and personal secretaries, to legislative director, legislative assistant, committee staff, all those things, and we take it as a given that that's what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sometimes folks forget that we have to explain these things. Not everybody lives in our world.
No. Yeah, I discovered it wasn't just the senator's office; it was an organization.
Oh yeah. A corporation.
Yeah, a corporation, exactly. Yeah.
Because you got the folks back at the state branches too.
That's right, exactly.
Don't forget about the folks in Montpelier and Burlington.
Yeah. So I had 700 or so cartons up in the Russell attic to deal with. So I started working on them. When I approached them, I kind of threw up my hands. There was boxes floor to ceiling with a little narrow aisle in there, and some of the boxes had labels, some of them didn't, and like I didn't sleep that night. Like, what the hell am I going to do? What did I get into here?
It's like that scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark at the end, where they just put the Ark in there, and it's just boxes as far as the eye can see.
Yeah. But an archivist, you start with the first box. You open it up, see what it is, and put it on the side, and maybe give it a letter or a number or something. And slowly you start to see the series form coming out. Campaign stuff.
Right.
Education committee, Environment and Public Works committee, and so on, all the way.
Right.
And so I got that going, and Stafford hired an intern for me. So I trained him in that area. So I kind of left a lot of that to him to kind of do. And then I decided, since I was there, and I had all the staff there, that I would spend my time learning about the office, how it functioned and stuff, by interviewing just about every staff member there. So I made appointments and went around and interviewed just about everybody there, and eventually the people in the state offices as well.
Right. How much interaction did you have with Senator Stafford and then later Senator Leahy during this period?
Yeah, not too much. We would say hello to each other. He was like a Southern gentleman in a sense. He had a cane, and he would come in around 10 o'clock or so.
Oh, banker's hours.
Yeah, banker's hours, and he would nod to people on his way into the office and stuff. And so he would kind of stay in there pretty much, and they would bring things into him. And a couple of times I went in to see him, and I was introduced to him by the AA, and then I was in a couple of times just to see him about something, and so he knew I was. And one time I used to. He knew I was going to the hearings and stuff with Vic. One time, I guess Vic wasn't around to go, and as the senator asked me if I would accompany him, so I did, and he took me into the senator's elevator, which I had never been in, and he and I were in there, and it went up. The door opens, and Senator Dole walks in. So Senator Stafford says to him, "Bob, I want you to meet my archivist, Connell Gallagher." And Dole, we shake hands and stuff, and there was a little small talk between the two of them, and then I followed Stafford off to that meeting, and then I hear through the grapevine quite a while later that when Dole went back to his office, he called in his AA and he said, "I just ran into Stafford on the elevator, and he has an archivist. I'm the majority leader. How come I don't have an archivist?" So I heard that story from Dole's archivist years later.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's
It was
fantastic.
good.
Well, it's up to the member how they spend their office funds.
Exactly. That's exactly.
Well, tell me, I assume what you were pointing to here is the diary that you kept.
Yeah, I have notebooks. This one is book number 1, June 1988 started, and I would go home at night, and I would take notes on the day, what happened, and I would always make a list of, okay, what am I going to do tomorrow? I made a list of all that kind of stuff. I kind of had to do that because the interviewing staff members, I had to get appointments and
Sure,
stuff.
oh, yeah.
And then I was thinking, I was learning things every day, and I wanted to get these things down in this
Right.
notebook. So I have these, and that worked out. That worked out really well because I had pretty much all of the knowledge that I picked up are in these notebooks. And I still have them. I don't know. They'll probably go to UVM.
Right. I was getting ready to say those need to be
They'll probably be part of the
the
collection.
Connell Gallagher papers.
Yeah.
But no, I mean the point when you're processing or appraising collections that large, I've always found that you have to prepare yourself the night before just to approach the mountain.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're just stunned into
Yeah.
inactivity, and it's like I can find something else to do today.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So tell me about the transition from Senator Stafford's staff to Senator Leahy.
Well, let's see. So I was working for Stafford that summer and fall of 1988, and at one point, Senator Leahy's secretary called Senator Stafford's secretary to ask about me, and Senator Stafford's secretary mentioned that to me that she had a call from Senator Leahy's office, and that they might be interested. And then that followed up with, I had a call from Senator Leahy's secretary. And she said, the senator would like to see you. Can you come over and spend an hour with him? So I said, of course, yes. So I went over and met Leahy. It was the first time that I met him. And sat down in his office, and he talked to me a little bit about Bob Stafford and what I was doing in the Stafford office. And I told him I was really packing Stafford up. He was shipping the papers back to UVM. And but I said I've been working with the staff on archival matters, what's important to save and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, would you be willing to come over and work with my staff the next semester? And kind of talk to them about what's historically important. And I said, yeah, sure. I had planned to finish Stafford, go back to Vermont, and work on the Stafford papers in the spring. But this was an opportunity I couldn't turn down.
Right.
Having worked for a Republican senator who was retiring, and now a Democratic senator who was on the go.
Right. So
I took that opportunity, and And then in January, after I left Stafford's office, I went over. I set up the same arrangement with Leahy's office, that I would come down for 2 weeks, go back for 2 weeks, because I had a wife and dogs and stuff in Vermont, and I did that kind of process. And I would visit the state offices when I was back in Vermont. So that was fine to them. They actually gave me a bigger salary than Stafford, not much, but another $1,000 or so. And then Leahy was in the Russell building, so Stafford was in the brand new building. So when I started working for Leahy, I remember coming into the Russell building and just being bowled over by the beauty of the place.
The Beaux-Arts.
I had been in the attic, but I used to go by elevator from the basement up through. I never was really inside it. Yeah, it was Beaux-Arts, beautiful, right. Gorgeous building with terrazzo floors, huge doorways and stuff. And
fireplaces in the offices.
Oh, yeah. I can see why Leahy he could have moved to Hart.
Oh, sure.
But I'm sure he just loved it over there. He just kept acquiring more space. His office went down the hall. Every time a senator left, Leahy would get another room for his office.
Right.
But it was much different. It was busier. He had much bigger staff. And they were all working like crazy. And Leahy was running around the office in his shirt sleeves, stopping at people's desks, asking them stuff, telling them things. I mean, it was...
This is quite different.
It was, Stafford was just quiet.
Winding down.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, I skipped ahead a bit. Tell me how you wound up in the New York Times.
Oh.
You, of all people,
exactly.
Senator Stafford's staff.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to fly home every 2 weeks, so I was coming back to Washington, and I sat next to this young woman on the plane and discovered that she was the daughter of a history professor at UVM. So we had a nice talk, and I was telling her about what I was doing in Washington and stuff, and she told me that she said she was a stringer for the New York Times, and she said, "Your story sounds really interesting. I wonder if I could contact you again about maybe having me over there to take a look and maybe write this up." I said, "Sure, anytime, So she called me, a few weeks later, and told me that she wanted to come over and interview me, and she wanted to bring a photographer as well. So I said, fine. So we met in the foyer of Russell, and I brought her up to the attic. And she interviewed me there, and this photographer took pictures of me sitting there with the collection behind me and stuff. And she wrote this up for the New York Times, and it appeared in the second section of the New York Times, a big picture of me, and then this article about what I was doing, archivist from University of Vermont, down and working on Stafford's office, and planning to ship the papers back to UVM and so on. And then the AA, Neil Houston, called me into the office and sat me down and said, "What's this about you being in the New York Times? A picture in the New York Times. A picture of Stafford has never appeared in the New York Times. And here you're working for us a few weeks and you have your picture in the New York Times." He made me feel like I had made a big mistake there, that I was loyalty, integrity. Maybe I had. So I kind of learned that I probably should have told him in advance that this was going to happen, so he didn't get surprised. But it was right. There was water under the bridge.
Right.
But Karen Paul, the Senate archivist, was overjoyed.
Oh, sure. Oh, absolutely.
One of these archivists getting in the New York Times. That was a real plus for the program, So.
I can imagine Karen and how excited she. Well, tell me about your working with Karen's office and Dick Baker, the historian at that time. How much interaction did you have while you were there in Washington?
I had a lot. I used to go over there all the time because I had questions about things that I would run across in the papers and stuff,
sure.
and I liked them. I got to know Richard Baker, very well, and became best friends with Karen. I mean, we had a lot of things to exchange. I gave her a lot of information about what was going on in Leahy's office and Stafford's office, and she gave me good advice. I got publications from them and stuff. And when I was working in judiciary, this is much later, Dick wanted to talk to me about maybe writing a history of the Judiciary Committee because there had none been written. I thought about that, but I'm not a researcher, really, you know. But that would have been an opportunity, you know, definitely.
Tell me about that subsequent work in 2007. Obviously, this is post retirement,
Yeah.
and you were attached to the judiciary staff.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me about that experience and maybe compare and contrast personal staff versus a committee staffer.
Yeah. Let's see. I was retired in 2006, and I was doing appraisals of rare book collections, personal rare book collections and stuff. And then I was on a grand jury for a while. And one morning, Senator Leahy called me and said, "Connie, I want you to come back and work for me again. I want you to work on the Judiciary Committee." And I said, "No, Senator, I'm retired now." You know. He said, "God, you're too young to retire." I said, "Well, okay, maybe I can give you 6 months." He said, "Yeah, that sounds great." He said, I'll touch base with the staff and they'll expect you, you know, September 1st or whatever date it was. So that's how I got on it. And I was kind of personal. My office was in Leahy's office. I was personal staff, but I was committee staff too, because I spent all of my time down in the Democratic side of the Judiciary Committee. Interviewed all the lawyers there and all the staff, looked in everybody's files. They were all pretty much okay about that kind of thing, and kind of learned about the role of the committees, how big they were. I mean, how many staff and how those staff reported to Leahy, even though he was not the chair of the committee. I think he was maybe he had been chair, but he was pretty important.
I think maybe Durbin would have been.
Yeah, maybe somebody like that would have been chair. But how important. And then there was a question about those records. Where do they go? You know, I went out to most of them were stored out in Maryland. I went out, spent a day out there with Senator Leahy's archivist, and we looked at a number of different series just to get a sense of what they were like. And I'm pretty sure, I'm guessing most of those have come to Vermont, but I'm not certain about that.
Sure.
I don't, but I did, you know, I talked to there was somebody on that committee who was kind of responsible for what goes where, and I talked to him about it a little bit, and he told me that they had this arrangement set up with Leahy's archivist that she would identify things that she wanted copied for the personal office, and she would take care of that part of it, and then the other stuff would go to Leahy's office. I brought with me, this is the final report I did for the Judiciary Committee.
Oh wow!
It's got a lot of different things in it, but I have for you a copy of the executive summary of it, which discusses those kinds of issues that Colleen Mason had been copying and transcribing Judiciary Committee files.
And Colleen Mason would have been
Leahy's archivist.
His staff archivist.
Yeah. And I knew her from a long time ago. And I recommended, there was so much stuff in the Judiciary Committee, I recommended that they hire an archivist. They really needed to have an archivist to deal with all that stuff, because it almost dwarfed the personal collection in a sense.
Wow.
I mean, it was just a lot of stuff. But
now, did Colleen Mason? A lot of senators, they're archivists.
you can
Who? Thank you. A lot of their archivists who are on their Senate staff sometimes transition over to the repository. Was that the case with Colleen Mason, or did she move on to a different office or a different?
I think she retired from there. She was there for quite a long time.
Okay.
I think she retired from there. Yeah. And I'm not sure where she was before she came there. She must have been in a repository someplace.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned to me over email that Senator Leahy's papers have been processed, and
Well, they're working on them.
they're working on them.
Yeah, working
Okay.
on them. Yeah, working.
Well,
on
I was getting ready to say that'd be a pretty quick turnaround if
They
if
hired,
they had
they hired 3 archivists.
3 archivists for
Yeah,
the
3
collection.
archivists to work on the collection. Yeah, the senator left some money to the university to take care of his papers. So
Always appreciated.
yeah, so that he has gigabytes
Oh, yeah.
of stuff, and plus, I think his collection was 2,500 cartons of paper.
Yeah,
paper.
right. So Senator Leahy would have been 75 to
Yeah.
23.
Um,
Yeah, because Peter Welch, I think is a freshman.
yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
He was in from 1974 until 2023.
Right.
That's quite a lot of years.
I assume that one of the challenge with a senator's paper like that is, Senator Russell, for example, was senator from 33 to 71. All of his material, though, is paper.
Yeah.
Whereas Senator Leahy was paper, email,
Yeah.
born digital
Yeah.
records.
Yeah. He was interested in the technology and that kind of stuff.
Which poses quite a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. But these young archivists,
Oh, yeah.
they know about that kind of stuff. When I was at Stafford's office, I became part of the Stafford family. He had a boat, and he took us all out on the Chesapeake. I remember my wife came down from Vermont, and she got to know Mrs. Stafford, and it was a very kind of a family kind of thing. When I was over at Leahy's office, he made sure I had some experiences over there. He took me to a foreign relations committee hearing. He was on the appropriations committee, but he was on the foreign ops subcommittee. So it was a committee where the Secretary of State was testifying, and they made sure I had a seat. I could almost touch the Secretary of State from where I was sitting. I was right up against him. This is when Bush Sr. was president.
Okay, so James Baker.
James Baker. It was James Baker. What a good guy. Tremendous knowledge, tremendous accurate way of speaking and stuff. But he had this big binder, and as the senators asked him questions, he would flip it open. Everything was beautifully organized. He was always impeccably dressed and stuff, And it was just quite a show to be that close to that kind of thing. And then when Bush was inaugurated, Leahy gave me tickets to the inauguration, so I got to go to that, and that was very impressive, because there I am in front of that huge Capitol building. This is America the Powerful, and they're firing off cannons and stuff, and then singing "Hail to the Chief," and then 5 jet planes come over. It was almost scary. It was frightening, the amount of power that the U.S. has. It's just so that was a moving experience to be there to hear that new president.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a step back and discuss some of these key milestones in how congressional archivists have thought about and tried to grapple with congressional records. And we've talked about some of these with Harper's Ferry. but also Karen Paul putting together the Records Management Handbook for the United States Senators. Um, Tell me about these archivists coming together over various times. Maybe the advisory committee for the records of Congress. Were you involved in conversations around that? Or
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
tell me about that.
Um,
This would have been 1990 or so,
yeah.
I think.
I went to just about all of those meetings, and we talked a lot about the about archivists going to Congress, and we wanted to increase that program quite a bit, to have more and more archivists coming, because that was the only way that these papers could be handled, is if people had an inside shot at them first, and were able to make sure that the senator's legacy was being preserved and such. Let's see, what else do we talk about there? There was a lot of it. I often gave brief talks about experiences I had within Leahy's office and in Stafford's office, and but yeah, it was a long time ago. It's kind of hard to remember.
Well, one of the big meetings was just not too far from here. The Margaret Chase Smith Library, I guess, is in Northwood University, something like that.
Yeah, it's in Maine.
So that seemed to be the real crux of these early conversations. We have these things, what do we do with them?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Was that a similar impetus behind the creation of the Association of Centers for the Study of Congress, or how did that come about in the early 2000s?
Yeah, that was getting the papers used was always a major question. how to tie them into university programs and that sort of stuff. How to get students involved in using them.
Right.
So that was a big issue at the Margaret Chase Smith Library, I remember. And getting into those discussions, inspired me to get involved with trying to teach a seminar on Aiken and Stafford, and I was still doing that practicum, and I would work congressional papers into the practicum too, and try to get some students interested in working on congressional papers. So that was always there, but that was fueled by discussing stuff with other archivists. Those ideas came out of those kind of meetings, and one thing I remember about the Margaret Chase Smith was I was there with Rebecca Johnson Melvin from Delaware, and we had this argument about whether lobster or shrimp were better.
Oh.
Or crab, Maryland crab.
And you both walked away from it. You were at that first meeting, or at least according to the photograph that Ray Smock gave me. You were at that first meeting at Shepherd University of what became ACSC.
Yeah.
Why did folks like you and Ray and Cheryl Vogt and Mike Gillette and others why was there a need for an organization, an association sort of separate from CPR or CPS as it later became?
That's a good question. I think what we were concerned about was we wanted to make sure that all these papers were saved. That a lot of senators weren't bothering with their stuff, and they were getting destroyed or lost or that kind of thing, and we talked a lot about that kind of thing to get in there early and talk to the senators about their papers and about how important they were and such.
Do you think we'll ever get to a period where the papers of legislators ever match the sort of appreciation and levels of preservation as the executive in this country?
That's a good question. I kind of doubt it in a way.
Sure.
But I mean, they should, because there are some great senators and some great legislators there. But I remember going to that big meeting that we had at the Library of Congress. It was for the bicentennial of the Congress,
Oh, sure.
and it was McCullough, I guess it was, who was the keynote speaker. He said he went through a list of important senators who had no biographies. So he said that there's a tremendous amount of work to do out there,
Right.
and those papers are they're going to be the meat for doing those biographies.
Right.
And it goes back to what we were talking about in the very beginning, that people, historians, were not that interested in those kind of primary papers, so they just sat there and collected dust. And it took the 1960s really to get them involved and then the 70s to get them involved in looking at those primary sources, to get that what really happened, from the inside. And that process is still going on now. And there's so many senators who have no biography, important senators.
What advice would you give to you are among that formative generation of professional archivists, especially professional archivists dealing with congressional papers and congressional records. What advice would you give to that English major out there, that library school student who's considering a career in archives?
I think I'd tell them, I'd give them my story a little bit, and I would tell them how interesting it is. It's almost like reading literature all the time, reading letters, diaries, all those kinds of papers, and how these are really important issues, important stories and stuff, and you can make a real career out of this. You can go to town on it, because there's so many collections coming in. So many universities kind of need archivists to come in and work with these collections. But it's just exciting. It's like doing puzzles and going into a treasure chest and picking out things, and you find all kinds of interesting information in the collections. It's just fun. I would tell them that I loved my career from day one all the way through to the end. And in my career, I had three stools. One for three-legged stool. One leg was basic archives, diaries, letters, all that kind of thing. The kind of thing that I spent 10 or 12 years doing when I first arrived at UVM. And then the second leg was congressional papers. When I discovered those, my whole view changed. My whole involvement changed. I became really congressional oriented. Before that, in SAA, I had been chair of the college and university archives section, and I was chair of the manuscript section, which was the largest one in SAA.
Right.
But when I got involved with the Congressional Papers Roundtable, that just took over everything. That was what I was doing. That and the Privacy and Confidentiality Roundtable. That was just so fascinating and so interesting. That's what I would tell them. That it's just a great career. It's bottomless, and it's got width and depth, and you can kind of do what you want. I mean, I did a lot of teaching and that kind of stuff. I focused on that, and some people focus more on cataloging and digitization and doing all those kinds of things. Pretty much, you can take a blank check from everything needs to be done. So you can, if you're shy and quiet, there's plenty for you to do in there. If you're gregarious like me, outgoing, there's lots of stuff you can do in there. So it's kind of a blank check there. You can do what you want.
Even libraries need extroverts
some
of the time.
Yeah. And the third leg of my stool was when I became head of special collections. I got involved in these artist books,
Okay.
which are kind of handmade books.
I saw some of these
Yeah.
on display.
On display,
Yeah,
just like those, yeah. I became really involved in that because that was new too.
Sure.
Printmakers and stuff were starting to do books, and there's a whole cadre of these artists, book artists around the country, and in Europe and France and England and stuff. And there's a great one in Vermont. Her name is Claire Van Vliet. She has the Janus Press. She's done over 100 of these artist books. A number of them are on display outside there. But I got really involved in that and met a number of other kind of rare book librarians who were interested in the same thing. And we created a kind of an artist book roundtable, so to speak, in a group called Rare Books and Manuscripts, RBMS, which is part of ALA. And we visited each other's repositories. We had conferences and stuff, and we tried to get these sales groups involved with conferences that we had, or have artist books come and have like a book fair where they had their books for sale.
Sure.
So that gave them an opportunity to have like it's like fishing in a fishbowl. All these people with money from universities coming, and an opportunity to see all these expensive rare books that you have laid out. So those were great. I just love that because I got to see the latest ones being done. And even though I didn't have much money, but I would buy them anyway. I would tell the artist, I don't have money for this now, but I'll pay you in a few months when I raise the money. So I would do that. They'd ship them back.
They're like Wimpy and his hamburgers.
Yeah, right. And when I got home, I'd be on the phone. There was a guy named Kalkin, who the business school is named for him here.
Okay.
Eugene Kalkin. And he
He's a
loved,
good guy to know.
Yeah, he loved the fact that I was raising money for UVM, because he was out raising money for UVM.
Yeah.
And he would always give me half. Like I'd ask him for $1,000, he'd give me $500. I asked him for $5,000, he'd give me $2,500.
You just got to start with 10,000.
Yeah, right, exactly. So he would give me, I'd have the basic pot there, and then I'd go to other donors
Sure.
and call them up and stuff, and I was always pretty successful at it, and we built a collection of some 2,000
Oh, wow.
artist books,
That's
and
impressive.
they caught on in the art department surely, but then some of the other departments on campus got interested in them, and then we had art professors from other colleges around were bringing their classes in, and then high school art teachers were bringing classes in, and for classes who couldn't come in, I used to put up a couple of boxes full of them, and I'd go out and talk to the classes out in town. So it was fulfilling university's mission.
That's right.
To support the community, and so that was really popular. And then a group of those high school teachers formed something called the Artist Book Guild. This is back in probably 1995 or 2000. Okay. They're still going, and they meet every month, So the artist book thing, that was the third leg of the stool. So that was my career. So I had enough new things going on to keep my interest.
That's quite a change of pace.
Yeah, at a high level. Yeah.
Well, you've also been very lucky to enjoy a lengthy retirement.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
What occupies your time? How have you devoted your time and interest since your retirement, other than the brief stint in Washington D.C. as a high-powered staffer?
Yeah. Well, since I became kind of a rare book librarian in those last 10 or 15 years of my work here, I got to know books pretty well, and I was buying books for the collection, so I got to know prices pretty well. And I would go to auctions. There's a number of auctions around here where they had book collections, and I'd go and I'd bid and look at things. So I got a good sense of pricing. So people started to call me about appraising collections, because if you want to get a tax deduction for a collection that you give to a university, you have to get a formal appraisal for it.
That's right.
And I looked into becoming an official appraiser, but that's to appraise everything, real estate, jewelry, and it's expensive and too many classes and stuff. But when I signed my name formally, I signed it Connell B. Gallagher, CA, because I'm a certified archivist, MA, MLS. The CA is certified archivist, but some people can read it as certified appraiser.
Ah. It's not a lie.
I know. I just put that. Those are my credentials. Because there was only one bank that wanted a certified archivist, and I pointed. I just said, "Well, here's my signature."
Good enough.
Yeah. But I loved it because it kept my hand in books. I got to look at books. I looked at some great collections. Somebody, a woman who was at Wake Robin in Shelburne, she had taught at Smith College. She taught the English Romantics, Wordsworth and Shelley and so on. But she was a specialist on Blake. And she had acquired a terrific Blake collection of first editions that was just extraordinary, because Blake was an artist, illustrator, as well as a poet. And so I was able to buy this. She died, and I was able to buy that collection from her niece for UVM. Somebody else, the person who designed this building, the Billings building, Henry Hobson Richardson, great American architect, his grandson was living in Woodstock, and somebody in the University Development discovered him, brought him up here. I gave him a tour of this building, and I told him that we were trying to move the library into this building. And he said he was very interested in that, and he picked out things that he thought his features that his grandfather had been responsible for and stuff. And then he mentioned just offhand that he had some history books. He said, I don't think you'll be interested, but I said, no. I said, okay, we'll come down and take a look.
Yeah, can't hurt.
We went down. He had probably maybe 15,000 books, something on that score.
Excuse me?
And a lot of them were 16th century, 17th century, 18th century. It was like the Stafford papers. I went into this room with boxes floor to ceiling. I opened the first box, started going through it. Half of the books were 16th century. So
these weren't Robert Ludlum and
no.
Robert James Patterson paperbacks.
No. This was Enlightenment figures of Voltaire, Rousseau, yeah. Samuel Johnson's dictionary, first edition. I mean, this collection was loaded. It turned out to be worth $1 million.
No, I mean, conservatively, I'm sure.
So I would visit him probably a couple of times a year, and I'd go through more boxes and stuff, and we became close friends. And he was a bookman, I was a bookman. So every book we wanted to take for UVM, he wanted to see it first.
Sure.
And he would tell me things about it. He remembered where he got it, why he got it, and stuff. And we just had great discussions about books. It was terrific.
I mean, that's such an integral and time-consuming part of donor relations. Is the, this is a donor's life.
That's right. Collectors love you to hear about
it. They love to share their knowledge. So, you may want to get back in the van and get back to work, but these folks need to do that. It's part of the, it's not the grieving process, but it's in the cycle.
Yeah. I mean, I did that kind of thing for manuscripts earlier. Go out, picking up people's papers. Yeah, you have to sit down with them, you chat with them. You learn a lot of things. I learned from Tom Bassett, the guy who was here who did all the collecting. I used to go out with him, so I learned a lot about field work from him. And he'd always take a lot of notes, and he told me to take a lot of notes.
Yep.
So when I came back, I had the collection, but I had a lot of notes about the family, and all kinds of different things.
Right.
So I was used to that, and I kind of loved that. I'm gregarious. I like to be out and about. So that did the retirement pretty much. I appraised a lot of collections. I appraised them for UVM, Middlebury, St. Michael's. Occasionally I appraised them for somebody who hadn't planned on giving them yet, but he wanted to know how much his collection was worth, that kind of thing.
Sure.
So it was just a lot of fun to do that too. Yeah. Another one I did was Edward R. Murrow.
Really?
His son lives in Putney, and he had some stuff left. Most of it's gone to college in Massachusetts, but he had some boxes left that he brought up for me to look at. Mostly photographs. It was kind of neat. Photographs of World War II, standing on the roof of the BBC, while bombing was going on and stuff.
The stuff you always hear about.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Wow.
And then his fight with McCarthy.
Yeah.
That whole thing. Pictures of McCarthy, pictures of him.
Good night and good luck.
Yeah, good night and good luck. That whole
basis for that.
So that was exciting to do that collection. Yeah. So you never know what's out there. That's why I would recommend go into this field.
That's right.
Because it's just
There's no 2 days are the same.
No.
Except faculty meetings.
Yeah.
Those are all the same.
Yeah. There's a lot of meetings involved. As I moved up, more and more meetings.
Notice we didn't dwell on administrative tasks in this interview.
Yeah.
Lots of time cards and PTO approvals.
But get to know the faculty. That's another piece of advice. Get to know the faculty.
Absolutely.
Because they can be users.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's
they're the root to the students.
It's a symbiotic system here. Well, thank you very much, Connie. This has been absolutely fantastic.
Oh, good. Thank you.
On behalf of the Richard B. Russell Library and everybody in the Congressional Papers archival community, thank you so much for your time and your work.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.